Okay, welcome to the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I've got a colleague in the industry, Adam Britton, from Resolv. Now, Adam and I have done a few webinars together on the SIL side of things from a financial management, rostering management point of view, and that's a very deep and meaningful rabbit hole that we've gone down. And it's being very strategic and also conceptual in those areas. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about case studies of real life success stories in terms of, when you put these strategies and concepts into place as a provider, what are some of the kind of cost savings you can get? What are some of the outcomes you can get for your staff and also your participants, etc.? So, Adam, with no further ado, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate you having us on your platform. We always love chatting with you, and we love going through this content. We're passionate about what we do, and we're excited to share it with as many people who are willing to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just for the people that haven't maybe seen the webinars, can you just tell us, like, who is Resolv, the company that is that you represent?
Yeah, simply put, Resolv is a company that helps SIL providers become more profitable and sustainable for the future. Our core business offering is we can assist you in ensuring that you are here for a long time to come, that you can weather the storm of the ebbs and flows of the NDIS, and you can be a very successful provider in the long haul. There's so many things that are outside of a provider's control, and really what Resolv aims to do is focus on those things that can be controlled. What are those internal functions within your business that you can control, that are within your grasp, that can make immediate impacts to your profitability and, most importantly, sustainability as a business.
Okay, so again, we're talking strat, we're talking concepts and business practice. What does that actually translate into? What kind of savings can you deliver?
Yeah, sure. I can give you a really recent example, Chris. So a customer that's approached Resolv and engaged on that journey with us, within their first year of working with us, they're projected to save $1.3 million annually, which is very exciting. It's exciting for them. It's exciting for us that we're able to deliver that impact. And in just the first 3 months of working with Resolv, they've managed to access $361,000 that they previously didn't have. So they can spend that on systems, processes, staff training, and really reinvest back into their business to be more successful for the future. Overall, I believe this is around a 7% net profit increase for that business, which is just awesome. We're really, really stoked with those kind of results, but that's just one example of many examples.
Wow. Okay. Wow. And every percent of profit really matters, right? Because in the sales and marketing stuff that I do, I really kind of highlight the fundamentals of the industry are that, depending on what you're paying your support workers, it's very common after paying perhaps a more decent wage to them and then superannuation, you're pretty much operating on a gross profit of around 30%, roughly, right? And so you've got to fit everything else into that 30%. There's got to be your managerial overhead, insurance, executives, and also the sales and marketing process. So, gosh, it's so true, isn't it? That a lot of providers are either just breaking even or often, unfortunately, making a loss. So, anything that can get you either back into the black, from red to the black, that's amazing. Or even if you are already all profitable, to make that margin healthier, that's quite incredible, actually, 7%.
Something that's very important for us, Chris, is that we're results driven. It's the core fundamental of what drives us is we want to achieve results. We're not here to simply highlight problems and show, look, you've got all these problems. We want to drive the active change to solve those problems and to increase the profitability of running a SIL business. And we don't believe profit's a dirty word. It's almost essential in every business. Any business expert will say profit is essential in running a business. It's part and parcel. You want to reinvest in improving your business, you need that profit margin in order to do that.
I agree. And I often say that profit is, money is oxygen. That's the phrase I'll often say. And I think that, again, talking about sales and marketing, what I do, sometimes I'll say, well, have you got a sales role in the team? And people will often, I understand the reason behind this. People kind of go, I don't like using the sales word. It's a dirty word, right? And so I do understand that. Because we are talking about human services, we're talking about impacting people's lives that are often vulnerable. And so I do understand that the sales word maybe is a slightly dirty word, but even if that's the case, whoever's, on your intake team or looking for business, they absolutely, in my opinion, need to have a sales mindset. Nevertheless, they need to have, to lead from the heart, be good in the head in terms of competent, and also be driven in terms of, hunting for opportunities, locking down the deals that make sense for the business. So, I kind of have a similar message. I resonate with that. I say, money and profit is not a dirty word. We can still do the right thing from a value and heart-based, reasons for being in this industry, yet also have a healthy underlying bottom line, which I think that's what your part of your mission really is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. So what kinds of providers are you working with, and what are the challenges?
Really, we work with providers of all shapes and sizes. If you're a SIL provider, you're a good fit for us, essentially. I mean, we work with providers who have upwards of 100 plus participants, providers that are mid-range around that 50 to 75, and then even your smaller type providers, 10 to 15. Different size providers definitely have different challenges that we've seen. For your larger providers, what we see across the board, really, and these are very, very common problems for almost all large providers with their scalability issue and keeping up with that scale. We've seen providers scale very, very quickly in a very short time span. With the introduction of the NDIS, we tend to see operational costs rising much faster than revenue. So increased staff costs without the revenue to back that. And I think a big part that plays in that is the lack of processes. You could have 100 staff in your team, but if there's no process to drive what those staff are doing, it's a waste of resources in essence. Initiative's great, but you can't be relying fully on initiative. There needs to be that railing on the bridge, essentially, that guides those staff in a very efficient and well thought out process. As the industry has grown as well, we've seen what I would call a stretch of expertise. So there's limited individuals within this space, I would say, that really understand the complex issues of the NDIS and the NDIS landscape as a whole. There's so many rules and regulations to take into account, so many considerations, and it's stretched across a very, very wide industry. So that lack of internal expertise can play a big part in, circular discussions and going around in circles without actually having a solution. I mean, I come from a client services background, and I remember being in those meetings, fortnight after fortnight, discussing the same issues and seemingly getting nowhere. And I think it's predominantly just due to that lack of understanding of what can be done, what should be done, what's possible within the NDIS landscape.
I get that. I think it's kind of like there's a golden combination of holistic thinking, strategic thinking, and actually stuff that's compliant and correct. And it's a rarer breed of individual that has that systems level thinking. And it's very necessary, isn't it? Because otherwise we make a lot of assumptions, presumptions, and sometimes the impact is that we're doing practices that might be costing us money. One of the things that the webinars refer to is, can you give me the exact figure? Was it around $35,000 as the average, basically what you might call leakage, whether it be the wrong billing or the wrong rostering combinations?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge that we see, is that their rostering and claiming aren't optimized, which, as you said, leads to approximately $35,000 per participant.
Yes.
In revenue leakage every single year. So that is probably the core element that we see providers struggling with, is that rostering and claiming business function within their provider model. We've seen one thing I've actually seen personally, and it's a very common scenario of the providers that we've chatted to. We've had so many discussions with amazing providers. They've got a heart of gold. Their heart's in the right place. They want to drive change. They want to deliver an awesome service. It's just tripping over that SIL complexity. We hear things like, "Oh, we recently completed a roster of care alignment project," and that's really our goal to make sure we're doing the right thing and aligning our rosters to our roster of care. As soon as we hear that, it's almost a trigger that we know there's going to be issues. You can't really align a roster of care to a roster. It's a dynamic process, right? Rosters change constantly. At least once a month, that roster is going to change for various reasons. We're working with people. It's not a system we're working with. So people are going to change their wants, their needs, their schedules. You can't align a roster and set and forget it, if that makes sense. It's a constant dynamic process.
I'll tell you what, mate. Because as soon as you said that, you go, "Oh, we've done an alignment project." My maybe more naive, sense would kind of I would go, "Oh, that's amazing. Surely they're organized, and that sounds great." But it's really interesting to hear you going, no, that's actually kind of a yellow to red flag that might, show that there are issues. So, I mean, again, we're talking about fixing problems for SIL providers specifically. It's around billing, it's around rostering, it's around your process, the whole lot. Like, how are you actually solving the challenges that they're coming across in these areas?
Most importantly, we follow a very consistent process. So I think that's one thing that we really pride ourselves on, is that level of consistency and having a very clear process forward for every single provider, and it works across the board. So to give you an example of how we solve for these common issues that we see, we often start with a full review, and it's a full analysis of their current financial situation. So what is the funding level? What's the cost of the rosters? What are they claiming for? We do this free of cost, and we show them the impact to say, this is where you're currently sitting. Now, this may be pretty scary, and often it's the first time they see this level of detail and this financial analysis. But from there, the benefit of partnering with Resolv is we have the solution to get you out of that mess. So not only can we show you the issue, we can show you the pathway forward.
This podcast is brought to you in proud partnership between Peak Provider and Izango Care Partners. Izango is a system that I have used personally in my own business on the Central Coast, and do so today. It blows my mind in terms of what it can do, in terms of the simplicity of the rostering process, both as an administrator in the back end at the management level, but also from a support worker point of view. I'm a believer that you should not have any pieces of paper as an NDIS provider, and that even your observational charts should be inside of a system such as Izango. And I'm happy to say it can do all of that and more. So if you're looking for something that allows you to do billing once a week at the click of a single button, or indeed export to zero for payroll, it does all of that. But it goes even beyond that, and it starts to exceed many of the systems out there, because it gives the ability to manage concepts such as SIL houses, so property number 1, 2, and 3, and which participants are in that property and what staff belong to it, etc. You can match the skills and particular support worker preferences from one participant to a team of support workers, and you can even stop people from being rostered on from a compliance point of view if they've not uploaded their recent CPR certificate, etc. So all of that is just incredibly polished and works really well, and I can testify to that from a personal experience. But what it does is it does way more than that from a customization point of view. I've never met a IT provider that is not only willing to do customizations, but able to turn them around in a timely manner according to your very specific requirements. So if you're interested in signing up to Izango, check it out via Peak Provider. It can do everything from capturing data to tracking leads to creating participants based on all of that initial data, and ongoing administration. So don't have all these data points in various places that are disorganized. Have them in a central system such as Izango, and you will find that your administrational time gets cut in half. So inquire now via the link in the show notes below. This is something that Peak Provider highly recommends, and I hope that it does well for your business.
And the way we do that, we really prioritize. For the first time ever, they can prioritize their SIL homes in terms of financial performance, which ones are in what we call a critical situation, where they're costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars and need immediate attention and action to keep this model sustainable, and which ones just need a bit of a spot fix. And we can put them in order and focus on, priority, top priority first, and work systematically through each roster, which really delivers high impact very quickly. We can do things such as analyze historical claiming, look at making sure that the funding is being used optimally. And really they're the two things we like to focus on, because they're the biggest impact, is the rostering and the claiming side of things. That's what drives that $35,000 per participant leakage predominantly, is around claiming and funding.
Okay, so like, again, to kind of like simplify that even more, like imagine you're a provider now listening to this and you had 10 SIL participants. Like this is going on averages, and you need to look under the hood to see what's going on. But the back of a napkin is it's 10 times 35K, right? So the theory is you could be looking at $350,000 of savings just by looking under the hood, basically. And you do that, through consultation, and indeed a complementary health check that basically gives the business case about, why it's worth looking into this.
And the results are quick. For a provider of 10 participants, you could expect within 6 weeks, we've come and adjusted those rosters, we've aligned your schedules for support, aligned your claiming. So that $350K, theoretically, it's the industry average. It's certainly what we see. that can be realized in as little as 6 weeks of a provider that size of 10 to 15 participants, because we can work so quickly through that. So it's very immediate impact. It's realized in a very short time frame, rather than obviously across the length of the plan, we can deliver that immediate impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if I was to go on to the kind of the individual house level for a second, like in the webinars, and those are all available at peakprovider.com.au, by the way, you can sign up and instantly watch them. We talk about the ROC tool, and we talk about it being a quoting tool, and how we need to use that to consider a house holistically and say, well, how many participants are there in there? Not, we kind of dispel some of the myths that there is no such thing as just a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 all the time participant, and we really nut it through and look at the times of the day and the combination of supports, etc. So, like, watch that webinar if you haven't already, basically. But having with this assumption in mind of, like, you need to look at the snapshots of the individual house and look at the composition of the participants, and also whether there's any vacancies, right? I guess my question is, with the stuff that you do, if you're in a situation where the house that you're looking at doesn't actually align to support funding, what do you actually do about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's in an ideal world we can solve for every problem, but obviously we don't live in an ideal world, and there's certainly some things that we can't control. So for any houses requiring what we call over servicing, so delivering support above the funding level, is essentially what over servicing is. The next pathway forward would be a change of circumstance, and we have tried and tested methods to minimize the impact on the provider's time, to ensure that accurate information is being collected and tracked, because that data is so important on getting a successful change of circumstance. But we introduce a concept that we believe is vitally important, which is shared accountability. So everyone involved in that process shares some sense of accountability with that.
And what do you mean by that? What does shared? Because it's interesting, because change of circumstances, I think you're right. If you get it right and you nail it, you're increasing your chances of a quicker and more successful outcome. It's quite scary how long those can take. So I think that we always do have to be cognizant, don't we, of the potential time delays that can happen nevertheless, and also that there is a worst case scenario, which could be homelessness, right? If that was the worst case. When you say shared accountability, what does that actually mean?
So shared accountability is the provider not taking on the full burden of responsibility. At the end of the day, they're one part within a greater puzzle, right? And there's so many people involved in that decision-making process: the participant, their guardian, potentially support coordinator, their support workers on the floor, team leader, operations manager, you name it. Everyone that's part of that holistic team needs to have some level of accountability for the best possible outcome. If the provider, for example, would just go ahead and increase support and take that decision on, then the results of that decision rest solely on their shoulders. If the funding is exhausted, they feel that the pressure to continue providing that support at their cost, out of pocket. Whereas if they had the conversation initially, sat down with everyone and said, look, this is the situation at hand. We have to increase the support for X, Y, Z reasons. We all need to bear some responsibility in this. What will happen if the funding does exhaust? And chances are, with the current wait times, that funding will exhaust. You need to have that conversation up front and have a contingency plan in place, rather than going down the pathway of hoping the NDIS will come to your rescue. Assume they won't. Start with the assumption that you won't get a successful change of circumstance, and have that difficult conversation. Share that accountability amongst all stakeholders to ensure everyone has a part to play, right? You all wear some of that burden, because everyone talks about the risk of not increasing support. We see very little conversations around the risk of increasing support, because there's risks in both. There's risk if you don't increase it, and there's risk if you do increase it. And of course, as you said, Chris, the risk is quite severe of increasing support: homelessness, cessation of service, potentially leaving that person without any supports whatsoever. It's not a small risk. So everyone plays a vitally important role in sharing that accountability.
They do. I have lived and breathed and witnessed as a coach. I've been in organizations where I've seen that happen, and it's cost the organization in it's 6 digits at least, and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sometimes they've got a little bit back, but other times they got absolutely nothing back. And again, when you talk about people going in the room together and saying, "Oh no, it'll be all right. We'll do this. The payments team will get just. It should be all right." I think it was an American general once said that hope is not a plan.
Yep.
And this very much applies here. I've seen it. I've literally seen it. It's scary how quick your payroll costs and your rent and everything else stack up. There's a provider that I've worked with in the Sunshine Coast, and I'll shout out to who I are if you're listening. And I've heard stories in Queensland. This is so sad and horrific of NDIS participants being just dropped off at the emergency bay at the hospital because they're like,
Yeah,
we can't do this. This is not sustainable. And that I'm not saying that's okay. That's clearly not a great outcome, but it only shows the extremity of what can happen.
absolutely. And that's why it's vitally important to have that contingency plan and exhaust all your options. I see a real knee-jerk reaction to go down the pathway of increasing support because it seems like the quickest, easiest way to get that safety insured for that participant. But what I don't see is, thorough risk assessments being carried out, proper assessments of support being done, providing staff training, exhausting all your options first before then resorting to that last possible option of increasing support. And again, I fundamentally believe this is just due to a lack of process. For a change of circumstance, there should be a very clear process in place that follows a set of guidelines and instructions of what needs to be carried out first prior to increasing support. And it's one of the many things Resolv does is ensure that for every significant cost impactful decision you're making as a business, there's a process in place for that decision. So it's not just haphazardly done and little care or thought is put into it, resulting in either someone being left in an emergency room or a provider being significantly out of pocket.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because as soon as you said it initially, I was like, oh man, but what are those solutions? And even just you stating the intention of shared responsibility as a concept already with the intention set, my mind starts to come up with a couple of things that it sounds like you guys basically get over that mental block that the only way is the carrying on supports at the full suite. And that's not the only way. There are levers that we can pull by the sounds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just can pull, but absolutely should pull. Again,
Yes.
go with the assumption that the NGIS won't come to your rescue. It's a really good assumption to start, that no one's coming to your rescue, that additional funding is likely not going to be sourced in time, because it's what we see. It's a reality at the moment.
Well, yes. And then even when an interim plan or the new plan comes in place, often I've also seen, very quite rightly so, quite clear guidelines that go, you can only bill from this date onwards. That history stuff, nothing to do with this. Sorry, mate. It's very ruthless. So I think that it sounds to me, Adam, like that concept it's consultative because you get all the stakeholders involved, which it should be. And I would hazard a guess that might end up in service agreements as well. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a fair statement. It's a discussion that you have ahead of time. It's something that's pre-agreed before it even ever occurs. So everyone's aware of the situation before it even comes to fruition. You plan ahead. Obviously, you don't want to be planning on the fly, which is process driven. So that's what we do as well, is we ensure that your terms and conditions within your service agreement are robust, that they cover all contingencies to ensure that there's a plan for everything, right? That there's a process for everything.
Brilliant. Let's contrast small providers to large providers for a second. Like, what are the differences? What are the common challenges that the smaller one might look at? And then how does it change when you've got a larger provider? Let's say we've got 10 participants versus 100.
Yeah. So smaller providers obviously have all of the same issues larger providers have, just on a smaller scale. And I suppose a problem unique to smaller providers is they don't have the resources to dedicate to multiple teams. So there's a lot of juggling of numerous tasks, leading to overwhelming administrative burdens, potential setbacks, and really what we see as setbacks in the areas of claiming. And I think at least from my perspective and what Resolv has seen as well amongst our customers, is there tends to be an overly cautious approach when it comes to claiming, for fear of repercussion, and it causes significant issues in cash flow and underclaiming. Provider trying to do the right thing and not wanting to overclaim or commit accidental fraud will often shoot so far under what they should have that they cost themselves quite literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. To give you an example, Chris, we worked with a provider very recently who was delivering, credit to them, they were delivering just about the right level of support. Minor tweaks were required, but they were getting it roughly right. But they were underclaiming by about $300,000 annually for that home.
No way.
Just despite the funding was there. So that the plan showed that the funding was there. They were providing the correct level of support, but underclaiming by $300,000 annually. So incredibly, significant impact for them. They only had 10 participants. So you can imagine the level of impact $300,000 would have on that business. And even in another example I can give you, which is very recent, and it was really predominantly driven by the updates and PACE system, service booking management. So all of that system driven, and not being sure how to keep up with that compliantly, not showing what the process was. They had about $130,000 tied up in service booking and PACE issues, and then a further $280,000 that they hadn't back claimed for because they were just uncertain. They didn't want to do the wrong thing. Again, that real fear-driven approach. It was a total of over $400,000, and they only had 17 participants. So again, $410,000, 17 participants. It's a big, significant cost, out-of-pocket expense. And when we had the conversation with them to say, what would you have done without Resolv? They weren't sure. The question was, we didn't know. We were asking for help from the NDIS. They were saying, essentially, figure it out. It's your role as a provider to do the right thing. And yeah, we really empathize with smaller providers around that uncertainty and fear of repercussion.
Right. That's interesting because, I mean, again, as you're saying these things, I think of rostering and billing systems as well. So you've got to have the knowledge, you've got to have the right agreements, you've got to consult correctly, do the right thing in terms of the actual supports. But sometimes, literally, the failing can be if you've got basically silo effects of, the rostering person enters the shifts and, that's in rostering system A or B or whatever. I would hazard a guess that even just administrationally entering shifts in the wrong way in your rostering system theoretically could cause that kind of massive ripple effect in terms of underclaiming. Is that a fair interpretation as one of the factors of many?
Yeah, we have a saying that software won't solve your problems. Software will help you create efficient processes. 100% software is needed, but it's not going to do the job for you. You can't rely on that software to tell you what to claim. And I can give you a really simple example as to why. If you've got a 1-to-2 environment where you've got 2 participants sharing 1 support worker, but their budgets are drastically different. Say participant 1 has a $3,000 budget and participant 2 has a $7,000 budget. Collectively, there's enough funding there to cover the cost of 1 support worker. So you put that roster into the system will then tell you to bill 1-to-2, bill them equally. And what you're going to do is you're going to exhaust the funding from participant 1 and you're going to underclaim on participant 2, creating this real difficult situation to then undo and get out of because you've relied too heavily on the system. And that's just one of many issues. Again, you need the system for workforce management, for efficient processes. 100% get yourself a system if you don't have one. Just don't rely on it to solve all your problems for you.
That's a great example. That's so clean cut. I love that. And again, the ROC webinar really explains how we're completely within our rights to do that example of actually essentially splitting and sharing the funding because it's a household perspective. God, that's fascinating. Yes. Okay, right. So we're probably all guilty of that, right? Probably guilty of just taking the spit out when we generate the billing document and going, it should be right. Wow. Okay, terrifying.
I spend a lot of my time undoing what systems have done. Don't rely on your system. It's still a work in progress. And I think no matter what in this particular industry, because of the dynamic nature, especially how quick things can change, it has to be human driven. You have to have someone being able to keep up with those changes and driving a process into the system rather than the system telling you what to do, because the system doesn't understand the nuances, doesn't understand the day-to-day occurrences within that home. It simply can't. It can't track that as well as a human can, right? So have your system to create efficiencies. Just don't rely on it to solve the problem for you.
Right. Okay. So what about larger providers? And what are there any kind of examples of challenges that they might face?
Larger providers, they certainly face much greater challenges in the sense of the financial impact that the decision making can have. Right. So you think of a smaller provider with $300,000 for 10 participants,
Mm-hmm.
you can 5x that, 10x that, and that number starts to get pretty high pretty quickly. So the larger you are, the higher the number. So we see numbers in no short order of 1.4, $1.5 million in lost revenue due to inefficient systems. And it's not just systems as well, it's process driven, it's cross communication. So as you get larger, you're going to have that development of teams, multiple team functions within your business. You could have an intake team, a rostering team, your client services team, finance team. The issue we see is these teams aren't communicating very effectively. So what happens in the operations team isn't getting communicated to the finance team. The finance team don't know what's happening in the rostering team. And you have this systematic breakdown of cross-department communication, which results in significant revenue leakage. And again, it's mainly in those two areas of claiming and rostering, but every single area plays a part. So client services could make the decision to increase the roster without consulting with your finance team to go, is this cost effective? The rostering team may add additional workforce for whatever reason, again, without tracking that or saying we need to claim for this. We need to consult whether this is actually within budget. And then the finance team are simply trying to play catch up and do their best, essentially working in the dark. So I suppose what Resolv is able to do is fill that gap, right? We're able to come in and glue all of those departments together and drive process and innovation to the business to get them to a level where they're no longer leaking $1.5+ million.
Well, that only comes back down to the first principles point of you need, the way I look at yourself and your colleagues at Resolv is that first principle of holistic, strategic, and compliant NDIS industry-based knowledge, right? Like even whether you're small or large, if you've got multiple departments, job descriptions, role descriptions, the focuses of our just our humanistic everyday function, whether it be accounts or rostering or whatever, inevitably we're going to have a degree of blinkers on because we're focused on just getting through our day and filling the shifts or getting through our day and collecting accounts receivables. So, I kind of see it as very necessary one way or another to have that holistic thinking that brings all that together. Because unfortunately, you could fix it once temporarily, but then the problem might just reemerge if you don't continuously have that holistic perspective.
Definitely, and it's an ongoing process. You can never set and forget your SIL model. The SIL model of itself is a dynamic model. You need to have an ongoing process which is keeping up with the changes of that model. And if you don't, it's, as we've seen, it's going to cost you a lot of money by not keeping up with those changes and having a robust process in place to be able to ensure that you're not leaking revenue throughout those changes.
I mean, I guess understandably, we've got to be careful as providers as well, not to commit fraud. And, there's things that are genuine concerns nevertheless. So, what I guess are some of the factors that are causing providers to be cautious, in the way that they operate SIL?
I think one of the biggest issues, and this is very much personal opinion, but NDIS are adopting a punitive first, educational second approach. We've seen millions and millions and millions of dollars invested in fraud detection systems, fraud teams. Bill Shorten has done quite a large number of things to crack down on fraud, which I agree is necessary. It's really important that we don't have fraud within the system. But my question would be, how many millions have been spent on education? How many millions have been spent on assisting providers actually understand the rules and regulations of the NDIS and make the NDIS as a whole an easier to understand model, right? So I think it's that punish first and then we'll educate you that creates such high levels of caution where providers don't want to do the right thing. That they want to do the right thing, they just don't know how, and they're living in that fear of repercussion. Yeah, and I think in my personal experience, the industry isn't suffering from a fraud issue. It's suffering from an educational issue, and that's the gap that Resolv is actively trying to fill for providers. We bring that industry experience to your organization so that you can focus on providing an awesome service to NDIS participants. Really, that's our hope for you, is that you can focus on only what matters most, and we can tread through those muddy waters for you so you don't have to.
I mean, I completely agree with what you just said. My background before the NDIS was in online education, and I used to sell e-learning projects to registered training organizations, universities, high schools, the lot. And then got into the NDIS world. And for me, there's a concept in vocational education, especially called recognition of prior learning, RPL. And so if you're doing a certificate 3, certificate 4 in disability, whatever, and you've done one of the units or you've got relevant industry experience, you should be able to prove your RPL and all that jazz. And you get a certificate of completion, and that's great. But one thing that is just completely stupid to me is that we don't have a national centralized learning management system that has all of the things that you need to know about educationally within this, whether it be what's a restrictive practice or how to do manual handling. I mean, all of that jazz, in my opinion, should be in a centralized LMS where we all get like a unique student ID and we get a log on and we can transfer our skills automatically from one provider to the next as we go managerial or support worker level from place to place. I hope one day they get there. But I just that's my 2 cents on that too, because I agree. We have to, I think, it's not cohesive enough yet. There's work to be done there. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think no, I'll expand a little bit. I mean, I'm passionate about the NDI, so I think as Australians, we should be very, very proud of what the NDIS is and what it's done for Australians living with a disability. I think there's no question that it has made Australia a better place for people living with a disability. There's no question. Is it a work in progress? Absolutely. But my real thinking is that everyone plays a role. NDIS is just one system full of people, right? At the end of the day, NDIS is made up of people just like you or I, Chris, and people with their own biases, their own beliefs, their own, wants, you name it. So if we adopt a collective approach and go, what can I do to make the system better, rather than what can the system do to make my life easier, and we all help drive change, then that's going to create significant improvements in and of its own. So, talking about an educational program for all providers, that could absolutely be done. Someone could raise their hand and go, I'm going to take on that challenge and I'm going to create an LMS nationwide for all providers. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of the NDIS directly. People can drive that change outside of the NDIS, and we can have market innovation that helps the NDIS thrive as a whole, right? We can bring that change as well. So rather than focusing or waiting for that change, we can drive that change ourselves. And that's what I'm very proud to say Resolv does, is we're not waiting for the NDIS to get better. We're actively making it better.
Good on you. And my entrepreneurial spirit wholeheartedly agrees. I used to be the chairman of a charity, and I stopped doing that because I was like, I can achieve more in a private enterprise business that is not held back by a constitution or not held back by government red tape, for example. If you can just sometimes come up with it, then with technology and knowledge, everything's possible nowadays. So I agree with the spirit of what you're saying there. Okay, so God, it's an interesting world, because I see all the time people wanting to get into SIL, especially new providers. But I think it's really important to, first of all, recognize the complexity of SIL. So fundamentally, why has SIL become so complicated?
At its fundamental core, the number, if I could point at the number one thing which is causing the biggest issue, it's that lack of alignment. So let's use CP for an example. Let's take the complexity away from SIL and focus on the CP model. Now, if I provide support, community participation being CP, if I provide a one-on-one support, I know for each hour of support I deliver, I claim for an hour. And I know what the cost of that support is. I can check that client's budget and say, is this within budget? Cool, great, yep. Provide an hour, claim for an hour. Really simple. The complexity of SIL is that you're now dealing with multiple budgets, multiple individuals, multiple schedules, and that lack of alignment begins to break down. What their funding is, what you're providing, and what you're claiming for, we see disconnects across those three categories, which is causing the biggest complexity. And couple that with the lack of processes around so many important dynamics of SIL. So some of the processes, I can give you some examples of lack of processes that you must have as a SIL provider. If you don't have one of these processes, even just one, it's going to be costing you money. So you need to have a really robust intake process, a change in circumstance process, Chris, that's what we were talking about earlier, a change in roster process. If you want to change that roster, it can't just be a quick change. I will just quickly change it and move on. It needs to be a formalized process. You need to do your checks and balances. You need to have a reporting process. You need to understand each house performance intimately and know how every house is performing and which houses need some attention, so you can allocate your resources accordingly. You need to have a roster creation process as well. So every time a roster, or you're developing a new SIL home, you need to have a very robust roster creation process to ensure that alignment. So even without the complexity of the alignment, we see all these lack of processes as well. You put the two together and the entire model starts to break down. There's that reliability on software that we spoke about, Chris, where providers are hoping the software will do it for them. I can understand why. I can understand why they would want the software to fix this problem, because they're trying to align these things that I'm talking about, the funding, the rostering, the claiming, is not easy at all. It's very, very difficult to do. I've spent thousands and thousands of hours sort of honing my skills in order to do it. And I'm just one person, and there's thousands of providers. So it takes a lot of time to build up that knowledge base on how to actually manage a SIL model effectively, and then do that at scale as well. It's hard to find someone that can do that for you internally.
Okay.
We see inadequate agreements in place that don't cover off all those contingencies that we were talking about, Chris. Another one's hospitalization. That's a big one. We get that, question all the time, is what do I do when someone goes to hospital? I can't fill the bedroom. I can't, turf their belongings out on the road. So I can't bring someone else to handle that cost. So what do I do? Do I keep claiming? Do I stop claiming? Do I cease services? What do I do? We have the answer. It's, some of these questions that providers really struggle with. This is all part of your service agreement that can be solved for. And it's within the NDIS guidelines as well. It's just finding that. It's that lack of education, that lack of knowledge. And then now, lastly, we've got PACE entering the system, just to add a bit of, salt on the mix, rub that salt in the wound, so to say. It's just one more issue that now providers are combating with. So not only did you not have an adequate model in place already, now you've got PACE, which is now you're working blind as well. So now you've lost visibility, you've got no processes, you've got no alignment. It's very, very difficult. If I could point the finger and the blame to what's caused all of this, I would say it's fundamentally the roster of care tool. Without a doubt, I think the roster of care tool has caused so many issues. Whether the NDIS is aware of it or not, I'm not sure. But in my opinion, it's hindered the creative approach of the market. So if you think about the roster of care being the boundary, I can't step outside this boundary. So I can't adopt a creative approach to understanding a group dynamic. I have to stay within the bounds of the roster of care tool. It causes so many issues. Providers don't want to step outside of that roster of care tool for fear of repercussion. But by staying within the confines of the roster of care tool, they can't get that alignment. They can't keep up with that alignment. So therefore, the revenue leakage follows. And then the roster of care tool, like the history of the roster of care tool, is important as well. It's something that I've really spent a lot of time trying to understand. Why was the ROC tool introduced? What was its intended purpose originally? And why is it still here? It's not a good tool. It should have been updated years ago. So why are we still using it today? The roster of care tool fundamentally is a quoting tool. That's all it was ever intended to be, to say this is approximately the right level of support this person needs, and it equates to this much funding according to the price guide, right? The issue was when we were transitioning to the NDIS, we had tens of thousands of people under that core funding, that block funding, the grant funding models that were transitioning across. The ROC tool was intended to make that process a lot quicker, to get a lot more people into SIL funding, and therefore the group dynamics could be put on the roster of care tool, and you could show the NDIS very quickly that this home in this particular dynamic, this is what the support equals. The issue started to occur when people exercised their choice and control and began to move out. Now you had two rosters of care that no longer align, and apply that across 5+ years and multiple changes and market movements, you've got considerable issues now. So at its extreme, it's reduced choice and control, and it's significantly hindered market innovation and costs providers, I would say, millions of dollars annually in lost revenue.
Incredible answer, so comprehensive, and I agree with everything you just said. And the thing is that with everything you just said, even though those are the challenges, those are the challenges we have to face. There's no kind of way around that. We still are obliged to use the rock tool, and I can testify to your incredible depth of knowledge around that and the webinars we've got on the website. But what I would say is that, again, being basically a business coach doing sales and marketing, for the new providers, I hope that if you're listening to this, you can see that you've got to enter SIL with caution. And I would say that you've got to be cash flow ready, to not only sell up your houses, but wear some of the risk, right? Because you might not get it filled up straight away. Here's a question for you, Adam. It's obvious to me, so obvious, that if you're an existing provider, no matter the number of SIL participants that you got, big or small or medium or whatever, it's obvious that Resolv can save you money, right? So that for the existing SIL providers, that's obvious. When you're a new provider considering going into SIL, just a very candid question, is that also people you work with, or is that not your target market in terms of who you consult for? So you're a newbie.
People entering, yeah, it's a really good question, Chris. We don't necessarily work with them ongoing. They have no SIL participants at this stage. So we work predominantly with providers who have SIL participants as we sort of embed ourselves into their business model, and we assist with the day-to-day operations as well. So we're very intimately in the trenches with them, doing the heavy lifting alongside them. So if you're a new provider just entering the SIL market, what we offer at no cost is guidance, just to give you, the correct understanding. This is the current SIL landscape. This is what you're in for. This is some consideration. So we set you up for success. And that's just a general chat. Come have a chat with us, and we'll make sure we point you in the right direction. As you begin to scale up and grow, we can absolutely do that with you. So we can partner with you from day dot to make sure that you're never in a situation where you're out of pocket or you've got your model incorrect. We set you up for success from day one. So absolutely, if you're a new provider, still feel free to reach out, because we can help you at no cost.
Okay, wow. I mean, that's quite the offer. So in terms of perceptions in the industry, right? So you got people that, whether they're new or existing, whatever, I think the common perception is, monetarily, people go, wow, the budget's huge. And people go, wow, surely that must be really profitable. Is that the truth? Is it profitable actually?
I think, it's something we hear a lot, is SIL is profitable, right? That you get into the SIL industry because there's money to be made. I think, and then across the market as well, SIL is demonized almost because profit's perceived as a dirty word. So what we actually see is the complete opposite. And while there may be a very small fringe of amount of providers who may perceive NDIS participants as cash cows, and I absolutely hope they get caught, I do, and I hope that the fraud department does their thing. The data speaks for itself, Chris. Approximately 2 out of 3 providers are making a loss. And I honestly would not be surprised if that number rose to 3 out of 4, so 75% in the upcoming financial year, and that's predominantly due to market cap. So if you think of this long term, and the trend continues, so we begin to see more and more providers making a loss, then those providers will slowly go out of business, leaving only a very small marginal amount of providers left that were able to weather the storm. And it would severely limit choice and control for participants, because you've got less choice of who is your provider. And then that lack of competition will also likely reduce incentive to spend money on increasing the quality and efficiency of your business, which is, again, another huge loss to the industry. So I don't think these numbers are set in stone. There's definitely things that can be done, and every provider that's come to Resolv has increased their profit margin. So there's not a single provider we haven't worked with that we were able to make an impactful change for to increase the amount of revenue and profit they were able to achieve. So these numbers aren't set in stone. It's not an industry problem. It's an internal problem that can be solved for.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, how can people take action on this kind of stuff, right? So if they wanted to, what can you offer to people that might be interested in exploring this further?
The most impactful thing you could do is have a chat with Resolv. It's what we're here for. If you want to make an immediate change today to your business, in my opinion, the most impactful thing you can do is reach out to Resolv and have a chat with us. And by the end of that conversation, we'll have a very clear pathway for you to begin seeing similar results to the ones we've discussed today. That $35,000 per SIL participant is a very real number that we're able to achieve for each and every one of our customers. So that would be my advice. I know it's definitely self advice, as in it's benefiting me, but it's advice that I would encourage all providers to reach out to us, because we can make such an impactful change. And really, you've got two choices as a provider. You could initiate change yourself, or you can wait for the NDIS to come to your rescue, and really prefer, obviously, the providers who are looking to initiate that change themselves and drive market innovation themselves, rather than waiting for the NDIS to do that for them. And there's just so many creative individuals who are doing awesome things to make the scheme more sustainable, yourself included, Chris. I think there's so many good people out there that can make this change, and we can't solely rely on the NDIS to make this change. So don't wait for the NDIS to make this change. Reach out to us, and we're happy to have a chat with you.
Well, that's the thing, and look, we you know, what we'll do is we'll put a page and a link together so people can just click on the show notes literally and go through there. And I believe it's going to directly be able to book a meeting with you guys. So you know, there's I believe there's no obligation. In fact, you know, you don't have to worry about showing everything at once or how you have to prepare. It's a no obligation conversation just to explore what your current practices are, what your objectives are. So like really, I can only encourage people like you. There's the gift of that, right? You and your team are just so incredibly knowledgeable and in it for the right reasons, but have got the knowledge strategically. So, you know, I having run, I don't know how many webinars we've done now, but 4 or something. We've done so many.
Yeah.
I literally know you guys know your stuff. So I'm very happy to be recommending that myself personally. And you know, I can tell you what, when I eventually open my own SIL operation in the future, without a doubt, I'll be working with Resolv too. You know, it just makes so much sense to have the right people doing the right thing here. So I guess like on a final note, like where do you see the future of all this, Adam? You know, where is SIL heading? What's the macro view?
I think a lot of people paint a fairly bleak picture for SIL. And if you're into reading, you know, analysis reports, you'll probably think the same thing, is that it's fairly bleak at the moment. But I'm incredibly optimistic about the possibility of change. Like I said, there's so many people trying to initiate that change externally. We're not waiting for the NDIS to make that change. We're on the front. We're leading the charge, because we fundamentally believe that the NDIS is something we're all responsible for ensuring its success. It's not just the NDIS alone. We can all make immediate and impactful change to the scheme, the insurance scheme, to make sure it's here for a very long time. So we've seen it firsthand. We know that SIL can be a sustainable support model. It doesn't need drastic change. It doesn't need, you know, huge market reforms. It just needs education, good systems, good process, and innovation in how you're operating SIL. And that's exactly what Resolv are bringing to the table. We're really passionate about that, and we really want the SIL market to thrive and succeed. And we're not waiting for the NDIS to make that change. We're absolutely making that change for providers today, right now. We're making those changes.
Exactly. I think it's important to take the action, but also not put all eggs in one basket either, because you know there are there's the individualized living options, the ILO schemes. You know, yes, that's there. Some people see it as an alternative to SIL, but it's quite rare still. And I also think that even if there's a slowdown, perhaps on you know the issuance of new SIL budgets, even if things like that change, the way I fundamentally think is that there's always going to be people that need this service one way or another. So yes, we've got to roll with the changes and adapt, etc. But you know, just make sure you're doing it efficiently along the way, and then that, I think you've got the averages, which can be there's a good reason to do better in terms of we don't want to be one of those 2/3 or more making a loss. But the rosier story is running your business really well. That's the way I look at it as well.
Yeah, and it can be done. It's not something to bury your head in the sand about and think that change isn't possible. It's absolutely possible. There is a way forward in making sure that you as a SIL provider can be sustainable for a very, very long time and do what you're passionate about. I'm sure most people get into this industry wanting to make a change and wanting to deliver an awesome service to people living with disability. They just get strung up on all the rules and the regulations and trying to understand the model and navigate their way through it, that they get lost along the way. And it begins to break down very, very quickly. So I think having someone by your side to do that for you, so you can just focus on why you got here in the first place, is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I think that's very true in any area of expertise. Well, listen, Adam, it's been fantastic having you on. Thank you so much for your time today. Once again, we'll put that link in below where you can book a meeting with Adam and the team. Highly encourage you to do so. I've seen so many positive stories from working with these guys over the last 6 months. So thank you for your time, Adam. And look, my name is Chris Hall. This is Peak Provider. If you're interested in looking at the sales and marketing equation as well, there's free webinars on the website. I specialize in HubSpot implementations and doing other things too. And one way or another, let's bring all of this stuff together and have a refined strategy so that you can scale your business, be profitable, and ultimately use that money of oxygen to impact positive outcomes on the participants that we all care so much about. So thank you again, Adam. It's been a pleasure having a chat with you today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chris. Appreciate it.
Once again, for a final reminder, this podcast was brought to you by Izango Care Partners in partnership with Peak Provider. Highly recommend checking out a demo. Click the show notes below and book yourself in to have a look at what the system can do.